So I would first of all now like to reveal the results of the first poll which we ran, which is, what do you think of companies advocating for LGBT rights? Where is the poll?
Oh, there's the results. Okay, what do you think? 63% of you think it is because companies genuinely care. 38% of you think it's just PR. On Twitter, it was rather different. 16% of people thought, who responded, that companies genuinely care. 84% that it was just PR. Well, we need to do more to change the perspective of people outside this room, I think, with that. Let me also now set up the second polling question, which you can answer while we have our next panel. And that question, can we bring it up? Can LGBT advocates make more progress working with or without companies? Well, having just heard Gina Miller, I shall be interested in your responses to that. You have about half an hour to answer that. And can I then invite the next panel up to join us? Where are the next panelists? So Roger Carr, Jayne-Anne Gadhia, Tamara Ingram, and Helena Morrissey. Come up and join me. And this panel will be about taking what Gina has said and thinking about what that means for companies. Roger, why don't you? I don't think it matters what order you're in. Come,
yeah, fine.
Come and sit here. I know who you are.
Very good. Nice to see you.
That's fine. Hi, come on in. So you all just heard Gina on what it takes to be an advocate, and if only we all had that grit. But when you listen to that, Roger, what does it make you think about how you lead and how you advocate within your organization?
Well, I think, it's an amazing amount of courage to do it as publicly as Gina does. I think in an organization, you start off with a better power base because you're leading an organization, and that gives you a platform for delivery of a message. I think the message has to be authentic. It is not about PR. If it's about PR, people quickly see the lack of authenticity. And without an authentic belief, it quickly disappears as noise. So I think you lead believing the case you're making, using the platform you have, still needing to persuade, still making the arguments, and still doing the analytical work before you start the message as to the nature of the audience, the purpose of the message, and the strength of delivery.
And how have you done that? How have you shaped up on those criteria yourself?
Well, I think, with regard to this particular topic, diversity, first of all, in all its form, it isn't words, it's deeds. So the most obvious one, of course, was with Helena, which was the whole challenge of women on boards as a starting point, and then women in organizations. And the real belief I had at the very start was, it's absolutely insane to try and not utilize 50% of the population, where the talent is. My wife would always say 60% of the talent is in 50% of the population. But, it was a fundamental belief. And therefore, you needed to commit to it, not just as a women's issue, but as a business issue. And as we know, Helena, managed to engage people like me who had no axe to grind on a woman's issue, but every axe to grind on a business issue. And that was the interest that drove the argument and enabled people to see. And as a result of that, the business I chair has more than 30% of women on board and going through the organization.
And what about the LGBT agenda?
Well, LGBT, I think, as was said earlier, I listened to the first panel, it's less easy to identify the challenge but it's very important on a fairness principle and also on the same principle of, we want the best talent. It is self-interest to find the talent. It is, again, not sensible to exclude people for reasons that are nothing to do with the contribution they can make in a business environment. So, that drives the decision to stand up and to create, first of all, for fairness, a welcoming and a safe and secure environment, which we must do. Tone at the top. Without that, it doesn't work. then to put in process to make sure that it is understood not simply to be words but deeds, but most importantly to be the consistent ally and advocate of something that is good for business, appropriate for human beings, and recognises that diversity is a healthy thing to have in a business, not a strange thing to have in a business.
We'll come back to how you do it in a second, but Tamara, give us your perspective and what, you probably heard Vittorio Colau earlier say that the definition of success for him would be when 99% of Vodafone's employees felt comfortable being who they were in the organisation. Would you take that as a measure of success too, and how are you going about getting closer to it?
It'd be only one measure of success. It is an important measure of success. I actually think we have to have equality and represent the people on the street in the organisation.
In terms of
the absolute diversity and mix, and the divergence on the inside and the outside, so both in terms of education, in terms of representing society. So equality of that in all levels. So to me, that's another layer of success. How have I gone about it? I think we have a very strong point of view. I run an advertising agency, and the reason why that's important is our messages have to engage with everybody in order to move people and persuade people. That's why we need a very divergent and diverse set of people in our organisation. So I have total conviction on a human level and total conviction on what makes good business sense. Once you have that conviction, then I think and state it, because advocacy is about stating it and getting people to understand why. I think it is real. It's about internal behaviours as well as external behaviours. So I'm sure the first panel talked a lot about unconscious bias and a lot about training, but it's also about celebrating Pride Month, celebrating great people, being advocates for them, and also we're very privileged in the work that we can do because we advertise, we project. So I'll just give you one example that we're actually just launching, I think today, is there's a Pride Month in Birmingham. We're doing fantastic work with HSBC, and there we're doing social work as well as outdoor work, celebrating that and also recognising LGBT isn't on its own. You can also feel excluded even if you're part of that community, if, for example, you're not white. I think we have to think about inclusion in a very big way. Great pleasure. So I think thinking about how we do that and how we portray the type of work we do also makes a huge difference.
So because of the business that you are in, you are also in a very good position to give us a sense of whether your clients are in this for real or for PR purposes. The question of the poll earlier, because you, I think, have a very interesting perspective on how genuine is the commitment amongst businesses that you deal with.
Well, I'm really clear as Roger was, that I think that this is really authentic. And I'm incredibly optimistic. I know there's been some pessimism from last week, but I'm incredibly optimistic. And it's partly because the people who make up our employer base are Gen Z and millennials, right? And they are much more gender fluid about how they see things. And the internal expectations are that we're going to be different organizations. And even though I think our politics in the outside world has been terribly polarizing, we're talking about that, actually, bizarrely, the majority of people actually are very much more relaxed about fluidity. And I was thinking when I was coming here, we did a wonderful work for Thailand recently, using a transgender person, and very much liked and celebrated. So I think there's something about the difficulty in politics on the outside, but actually young people who work for many of our organisations who are expecting change and will not tolerate, actually, a bad environment and want this diversity and mixture. So I'm incredibly optimistic, and I believe it to be very real.
Thank you. So, Helena, Roger mentioned your work of the 30% Club. What lessons have you taken from that for the LGBT agenda?
So really what I learned, was what we're all here to talk about, was really that the underrepresented people can't solve their own lack of representation at the top of business or in society. They need allies. And Roger, just to give him the credit where it's due, he was one of the first two chairmen, and at the time, 99 out of the 100 FTSE chairmen were men. So, and it's not much different now, to be honest, on the chair's position. But it needed people who weren't women to come forth and help us to progress. And I don't think that's anything that we should be embarrassed about. I think if you are, as I say, underrepresented, it's naive to think that we could do it alone. So women talking to women about women's issues wasn't going to get us there. And I learned that actually that really did unblock years and years of no progress or very glacial progress. And I do believe that that can be extended. At the moment, I chair something called the Diversity Project. I'm delighted to see Matt Cameron in the room, who is part of that on the LGBT side. And he also runs LGBT Great. I mean, we had an event, it feels a long time ago, but I think it was last week, Matt, wasn't it? Where we had a panel of LGBT plus people, and we listened. I mean, that was the other thing, to listen to what people's actual experiences are, rather than think if you're outside that community that you know what the experiences are. I don't think it's exactly the same at all. How could it be? In terms of the women's issue, I think it does need a much more subtle and nuanced approach. And I do think the starting point is to listen and to understand, and then to try to address the real problems that people are brave enough to talk about.
So, Jayne-Anne, you also were involved in the women's diversity, the women's side of diversity. How do you take the same view of what the lessons are? And more broadly, the panel this morning came up with the first panel, concrete suggestions of things that those leaders of those companies were doing. I don't know if you were here for that, but how did you react to that? And what do you think, in your experience, is the most important thing that you've done to push this?
Yeah, well, I passionately believe, personally, that business has to have purpose in society to make a difference. And I don't think we're there yet with the city at all. So when we talk about people taking this agenda seriously, I think it depends whether you've got business with a true soul and purpose, or whether you've got a business that just wants to make money. They both exist. And for me, purpose is what it's all about. At Virgin Money, our purpose has always been to make everyone better off. And we mean that both in because we're a bank, we mean that in a financial sense, but also in terms of inclusion. And I have to say, I disagreed with Gina Miller earlier around the fact that we shouldn't be isolating particular groups of diversity to make a difference. I think it's important to really be clear that we have got to focus on particular groups and be advocates for each group in order to lift everyone up. And I think that is hugely important. Specifically, what we've done at Virgin Money that has made an enormous difference. We've done a lot of sort of things that we hear about in terms of unconscious bias, but what we've done is we've created on our internal communications website, if you like, the opportunity for people to write about their own experiences. And the first person that wrote was a Muslim woman, not long after one of the terrorist attacks, who was writing about why she was so proud to be a Muslim in our society today and what Islam meant for her. The feedback from our business was huge. And the next thing that we had, again, we don't prompt people to do it, we just ask people if they want to share their views to do it, was a gay white man, and he had never previously come out, and this is how he came out, and he said, this is the organisation that's made me feel that I can truly be myself at work. And as those sort of messages are discussed within Virgin Money, and there's a Nigerian guy actually who grew up in the back streets of Birmingham. He was telling me, and he's a great violinist, and he was telling me about what it was like to be, as a black boy in Birmingham. He wasn't expected to play the violin, a bit of a sort of type of Billy Elliot type thing. And you put all his story on the internet, and what it does is it gets the whole organisation talking about the difference and celebrating the difference. And what we found actually is that the people that put their stories on there become the real leaders and the real advocates. And all we have to do at the top, if you like, is to create the environment where they can do that. And it started to flourish. And I have to say, it's super exciting. People write me notes to say, thanks ever so much for allowing me to do this. I actually haven't allowed anybody to do anything. There's just the technology there, and the thing has flourished itself. Super powerful.
So it's just the technology of having the capacity, the intranet essentially enabling people to...
And I think having a business, I think it wouldn't happen if we weren't very passionate about our purpose. It's about creating a better society. It's not about making money, and then the money comes.
That's really interesting. So that's a very powerful way of ensuring that you create the kind of environment within your organisation that allows people to be themselves. Yeah. There's a next step, which is going to be an advocate, to have your organization be an advocate organization, do any of you think that you have that role? And if so, how do you do it? Because that's the sort of next step. It's one step to create internally an inclusive environment. But the next step is whether you then go beyond that and you say you're going to actually be pushing for change as an organization. Roger.
I think by example. I think if an organization demonstrate not for box-ticking purposes, but the way it operates, the reputation it builds as a genuinely inclusive organization, the example is the best advocacy. And for me, I mean, recognizing that there is still much to do in BAE. We've done much, but we have so much more to do to make people feel totally secure and comfortable, from the LGBT community, of expressing their views and identifying themselves in a totally comfortable way. We have much more to do.
Do you have, how many employees do you have in parts of the world
we had 83,000 people all over the world, and there are pockets of people in the Middle East particularly where there are still laws and rules that work against the sense of full inclusion.
So what do you do in those places?
Well, we observe the law first of all, and we make sure that we don't put people in harm's way. If people are uncomfortable in that environment, we don't ask them to stay in that environment. But as people working within that country, we believe we have a responsibility not only to care for our people, but to promote within the organization at the edge of the law as much as we can do to improve behavior. So
do you advocate for change then in those countries?
We demonstrate by what we do within the law that we believe in change. And in the case of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where we've been for 50 years, we were the first real major employer to take women into quite senior roles and work with them as allies. And over time, of course, this has now become accepted practice, but at the start, it was quite a brave thing to do. Over time, I think what we've done has helped make the point that to be inclusive is the right thing to do and good for the company, and it's helped the process.
What do you do? Do you expect to receive criticism, Tamara, for some of this? And what do you do if you are criticized?
I'm going to stick to the optimistic side.
No, you have to answer the question. It's too easy. We can't
only
have it's all great.
No, I'm not going to tell you all great. We've done lots of work that is on the edge, but people are much more accepting than the politics suggest. And that's why I'm sticking to the optimistic side. My observation, like Roger, is that if we do the right thing, that on the whole people go with it. The only things that have been very difficult is when people's own lives, actually, interestingly, in certain countries have been threatened, and we move them because from their own family, not from the employees. But actually, I think the best way to advocate, I'm with you, is to have the behaviours of the organisation doing the right thing, and my belief that said something from the outside. I am in an industry, though, that by its nature has a sense of voice, which I guess is what advocacy is about. And we try and represent what we think, even in difficult times, the best mix of what we want to represent.
And presumably a greater responsibility because it has such a sense of voice.
We do have a great responsibility, and this is where authenticity of message is is very important. So I think last year, there was a Pepsi, I don't know if people remember this, there was a piece of work for a client anyway, where they represented someone in a very inauthentic way, and it got a lot of backlash. I mean, unless you're authentic from the purpose of what you represent, either your internal organisation or the brand, then that's when you get backlash. You don't get backlash if you're authentic to your beliefs.
I'm going to open to questions in just a second, but Tamara, how do you, Helena, how do you cope with criticism? Do you assume that there will be criticism?
Yes, I mean, I think one point of agreement with Jayne and one point of disagreement. I mean, clearly you have to be quite courageous and forceful. You have to be able to have some sort of a thick skin. If your heart's in the right place, you're doing the right thing, I think one has to keep ploughing on, and there will be criticism. I think if you're trying to change, you will be criticised. Gina actually just criticised me. So let's set the record straight, because one of the things we're doing to align the internal and external advocacy is we're putting our money at Legal & General where our mouths are. So we have just launched this Gender and Leadership Fund. It's not a fund for women. It is a fund to empower us all to put our money where our mouths are, to enable us to work for gender equality at companies. And actually, sorry,
Thank you.
No.
Briefly,
but,
Jayne-Anne.
we need to support each other a little bit, advocates, I think. So that's my point.
Well, and I'm sorry, Hannah, because what I was about to say was, you see, I think the criticism is the good thing. It's the thing that makes us stand up for what we really believe in. If everybody agrees with you, why do you stand up? I mean, we at Virgin Money, when the gender pay gap was required, we were one of the first 4 or 5 companies that published our results, and they were bad. We've got a gender pay gap of 35-ish%. And of course, every time the gender pay gap was subsequently mentioned, we got, and Virgin Money's not very good either, what it's actually done is it's driven our organisation to say, do you know what, we're definitely going to sort it out. And I think, the criticism that you get, rightly or wrongly, for setting up your fund, I presume, Helena, means that you're going to make absolutely sure it's really successful.
Okay, this is a very important conversation, but I'm going to open now to questions or comments from the floor. Yes, at the back there.
Hi. You talk about having a strategy as an organisation and being strong advocates. How do you measure that in your organisation, and how do you report that back to the people that work in your organisations as well as the stakeholders who invest in you?
So that's another important return to the question of measurement. Who should we go to? Tamara, how do you measure it?
We measure it by 2 areas: equal representation of the communities that we serve and work in, and we are woeful in some areas, and I think all of us are in many areas of diversity, but we're getting better, and we measure it also in engagement in the company.
What is do you mean equal representation of all, let's say, groups at all levels of your organisation?
Yeah.
Or do you...
So if we look at our leadership, have we got enough, actually we're well represented and perhaps better represented LGBT, but have we got enough diversity in terms of the ME environment? Have we got enough women in all places, all countries? So I think we're looking at all levels. So I think we have to be brutally honest, are we inclusive enough, and do we represent the total society that we serve?
I mean, so what we do is we do a staff opinion survey. We ask a number of questions that ask our staff, do we really think we're making everyone better off? And as a consequence, we take action. And one of the things that became really clear, my husband is Indian, and I was really worried a couple of years ago that we had really positive results from women because we'd focused on the women's agenda. And we had really poor results, comparatively speaking, from ethnic non-white communities. And somebody said to me, that's because you and others are standing up, making the case for the women's agenda. Somebody's got to be the role model for the others. And we started deliberately, actually, this is where this sort of internal comms thing came from, saying, well, how do we make it clear that there are role models for non-white people, for non-straight people, you know what I mean, for the LGBT community? And that's made a huge difference. Last year's opinion survey had got the balance much better. So I do think role modelling is super important.
So more role models, more, and then you mentioned your intranet. So more ability for people to, even if it's not at the top, for people to share stories. Because that's another point that Gina made. Next question. Yes, back here.
Hi, I'm just curious about what we've talked a lot about authenticity and what you're doing within your companies. I would like to know what you're doing in terms of trans people. Do you have gender inclusive toilets? And do you have equalities training to educate people on things like pronouns? I think there's a lot more done for the LGBT part of the LGBT. So I'm curious to know what you're doing specifically for trans people.
That's a very good and specific question. Roger?
We're moving towards making it part of the agenda we have. But we don't have the sort of toilet situation that you mentioned.
You discussed it? Is it something that you're moving to?
I think it's been discussed, but I don't think it's been a serious agenda item. I think what we're doing much more, I think, is making sure that it is regarded as part of the agenda, and trans is part of it. The LGBT positioning, the LGB part, is very, very understood. The development of this is something that we are doing. We're doing it in communicating with the people. It is a conversation. I would say there has not been sufficient positive action yet, but it is on the agenda. I mean, can I mention one point? I think all these things are evolving. When I started in work, which was a long time ago now, prejudice was the norm about everything. That if you weren't prejudiced about colour, people, LGBT wasn't on anybody's list. You were the odd person. And what has happened over time, which I think is the positive aspect, the community that comes to work now doesn't have those ingrained prejudices. And what we're doing is now, I think, pushing more on an open door in all of these areas, and by leading from the top and really being committed to talent management, whatever the other aspects of individuals are, on a fair basis, is something that people now accept and buy into. It's not as hard work as it would have been 50 years ago. So much progress has been made, although much to do.
Helena.
Yeah, so I agree with Roger that I think we're behind on the T and the plus parts of LGBT+, but I do think one of the things, certainly in my own industry, the investment industry, is that people are generally, historically, not been equipped to be very good managers. So you might have really great CEO leadership about this is important to a culture and how we want to create inclusivity. You might have great forensic data about what the situation is today. But actually, often it's just the top goal scorer, as it were, the person who's best at their job that then gets promoted to be a manager. And they don't necessarily have the skills, really, that they need to deal with situations like that, which are a lot to do with inclusiveness as well as practicalities around, like the loos. But what we're trying to do is to improve the management skills and to improve so people can have the conversation that they perhaps have not really had any direct experience in dealing with, including, it's a big topic in society today, obviously mental health issues, and how to definitely encourage people to come forth and break any kind of stigma associated with other things rather than just the identification issue.
So that points to the importance of the training that
It does, and I think as well, the reality is that there are a lot of different, if we siloed all of this and we had specific things around women and LGBT and ethnic minorities and so forth, and tried to preempt every situation by having particular policies of what ultimately we need is people to be treated as human beings, to feel really comfortable, and that's actually a lot about how the manager or the team leader approaches things.
We have looked at healthcare policies for trans. I think that can make a big difference. So there are certain specific things I think you can do for certain groups that we are looking into here.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. Yes.
Yes. What more do you think international companies should be doing to challenge the fact that homosexuality is still illegal in many countries and in many states in the USA?
many countries, Roger, you're Saudi Arabia being, you work in countries where this is the case. What more should you be doing?
We do. I don't think we are, this is a personal view, I don't think we should stand up as advocates against political regimes. I think what we have to do is run our businesses in the most appropriate, fair, and really, I would think, positive way to demonstrate that the behaviours that we are doing are the best ways to run a business and therefore to influence views and feelings in the countries. I don't think it's our job to stand up as pressure groups against countries and their laws. We are there to influence, but not to campaign.
I think the inside of the organisation has to be absolutely how you would want it to be. I do think, again, go back to the particular industry I'm in, I think where it is possible, we need to get the messaging as inclusive as we want it to be, really representing the total community.
Jayne-Anne?
I'm sorry, Roger, I disagree with you.
Good.
In that, and I always wrestle with this because I understand that, as business people, our priority is to our shareholders and our business. But I do believe if one holds one's beliefs truly, you have to stand up for them wherever you are. And I'm fortunate because, you know, love him or hate him, I've worked with Richard Branson for 25 years, and he's always done that. He's always been true to what he's believed in whatever country he's been in, whether that's around, he has stood up definitely on the LGBT agenda, homosexuality in particular, and also whether you agree with it or don't disagree with it, or the legalisation of drugs. Now, I feel very proud to be part of a business that has got a purpose. As I say, you can agree or disagree, but it's not just about the bottom line. And I think, you know, you have to be who you are, you have to stand up for what you believe in, and you've got to do that wherever you are.
One of the main things about effective advocacy, I think, is the style in which one takes it. And I think there is a way of reconciling the two positions, because in some ways, I mean, we learned through, again, 30% Club and others, that actually sometimes being charming actually gets you a long way, and sometimes being quite aggressive gets you a long way. And I think actually the approach of demonstrating by example, having allies within the regime or the government, and people that you can represent the views that you think are the right views too, is probably a better, more effective approach than trying to sort of hit it on the head.
That's an important distinction, right? There's two decisions. One is, do you get engaged in the advocacy, say in a country like Saudi Arabia? And two, if you are going to get engaged, how do you do it?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, standing up to be accountable for what you believe in is something I have done really all my life, and it's what we do as a business, and I'm absolutely a believer in that. But I think you've got to decide where you stand and how you influence most effectively. And sometimes you influence by behaviour and example much more than by being just an irritating critic to a regime that doesn't want to hear. It will listen, and it will watch, and it will see improvement by very positive behaviour. That's the kind of advocacy that I absolutely believe in, and I've always stood up, I assure you, for what I believed in wherever I've been, anywhere in the world.
The interesting thing is that calculus might change over time, yes, depending on the country and depending on the issue. And the whole conversation we've had this morning is that this whole LGBTQ journey has moved, not nearly far enough in many ways, but has moved quite a long way, and hugely in some countries. And so I think it becomes we would have had different answers to this question 3 years ago, and I hopefully will have even more different answers in 5 years. Just to end, because we've got 5 seconds, but I'm going to go 1 minute over, because I asked this last time, and I thought the answers were really excellent. In 5 years' time, in 30 seconds or less, what's the one thing that you hope you will have achieved or will have happened in this arena that you haven't got to yet, Jayne-Anne?
I hope that there'll be more people standing up and making the point. I mean, this is not about LGBT, but I was just thinking, Roger, standing up in our own country is difficult too. You know, so if it's anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, for example, shouldn't businesses be talking about that and not worrying about what happens if Corbyn's Prime Minister? And I think it holds us back because we think about the consequences. Saying, as businesses, what we think right, really important in 5 years' time.
So I'm going to quote Law Brown, who said we'll have really achieved success when women don't have to be honorary men, gays don't have to be honorary straights, and black don't have to be honorary whites, when you can genuinely be yourselves. And so we move beyond advocacy to just inclusive.
And you're going to be there in 5 years' time?
Oh, well, that's a hope rather than a prediction. But I do think we have to seize the moment. I do think now there's a real appetite. I mean, Sir Roger's mentioned how things have changed so much in his career, but actually the pace of change, the half-life of change is really accelerating. I do think we have to seize the moment and aspire to it in 5 years' time.
Tomorrow.
I'm all for seizing the moment. I think we have to have equal representation at the top of the organisation and throughout the organisation. And I wish we were all much further ahead, because even though there's a lot of noise, which I absolutely concur with, the numbers, unfortunately, in reality do not represent the communities we all
Are you going to have equal representation in 5 years' time?
I hope so, but we're a way to go.
Roger, the last word's yours. Where would you like to be in 5 years' time?
That this is not an issue that requires an international conference to bring it up to the focus of general people.
That's an extremely there is no need, I will subscribe to that there is no need, that would be a wonderful aspiration, no need for a Pride and Prejudice conference in
Absolutely.
5 years' time. We would like it to be so successful that we're put out of business. Thank you very much for that very interesting discussion. Before we wait for break, let's see the results of the poll, the second poll that we asked. Can LGBT advocates make more progress working with or without companies?
Twitter said 72% with. Aha, of course here, 96% of you said with. Well, not surprisingly, there's greater faith in companies within this room than broadly on Twitter. Thank you all very much indeed. It's now time for a break. Enjoy your break, and I think you have to be back here in about 15 minutes. So many thanks. Thank you. Really nice to see you.